Hey, you want to see something cool? What happens when you throw Fist of the North Star, Violence Jack, Kamen Rider, Devilman, and a sprinkle of Berserk into a blender and pour that mixture into a 90s shonen magazine? Then you'd probably get Kakugo no Susume, otherwise known as Apocalypse Zero, a shonen manga written and drawn by one Takayuki Yamaguchi, the creator of the bloody and brutal seinen manga Shigurui, which was a big influence on Tatsuki Fujimoto and Yuji Kaku. An admittedly self-indulgent series by its own creator, Apocalypse Zero is a hyper-violent, over-sexualized, melodramatic thrill ride that is sometimes so jarring, so incredibly fucked up, you can't seem to put it down. Like a dumpster fire in a Manhattan winter, you can't seem to look away from its brilliant, stank-fueled flame. Written with the lowest common denominator in mind, Apocalypse Zero is a series where logic often goes out the window for the sake of seeming cool or shocking, whose attempts at character depth are pretty blunt and focus on simple concepts such as the value of courage, the meaning of justice, and the power of love. A series whose villains are either perverse, monstrous mutants who torture mankind for their own pleasure, or over-designed mystic martial arts warriors who augment their bodies through cybernetics and forbidden blood magic. Every trope in the book is used here, from a turn to the dark side by an evil sibling who wants to destroy all of mankind, to a traditional Japanese high school somehow still existing in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. To me, Apocalypse Zero is the hot fries of shonen manga. You know it's bad for you. You know you can be reading better things or doing more with your sad, sad existence. And as soon as you want to stop eating, you've reached the bottom of the bag. It's frustratingly good, glaring problems and all. And in order to properly explain these feelings, I want to talk about the manga in full. So I will leave you with this before going into spoiler territory. Consistently topping its attempts to disturb its readership while providing excellent fight scenes every other chapter, Apocalypse Zero is a surprisingly earnest 90s gore fest that I recommend to those looking to be shocked and awed for 100 chapters. The unfinished OVA series from 1996 is also a great entry point for the series since it covers the first 20 chapters or so. But not the fighting game. Anything but the fighting game. Apocalypse Zero, without a shred of irony, is a really fun time. Even if it's kind of trash. Alright, we good? Good. Let's get down to business to defeat Hirari?
Kouji! Kenpachi Rama-sama!
So this manga has a weird tendency to retcon things as it goes on. For example, Hirari's whole character. So, I thought of explaining the important lore in chronological order, at least the essential stuff.
Ahem. 1945. The Japanese Imperial Army has been experimenting on soldiers and prisoners of war alike at the behest of the evil Commander Shiro Hagakure. The commander broke the rules of the Geneva Convention to create the ultimate tools to secure victory over the Allied powers. Zero Form Defense, a martial art that combines precise movements with the body's natural connection to the earth itself to rupture organs and implode bodies. Zero Form Iron Balls, augments in the form of large balls visible on the body's surface. Zero Form iron balls can be used as both a remote explosive projectile weapon or absorbed into the user's body to create an ironclad exoskeleton around one's skin. Tactical Fiends, lab-born mutants that are able to disguise themselves as grotesque humanoids until combat requires a scorched earth approach. And finally, the most devious of Hagakure's plans, Zero Form Fortified Armor Shells. Smelting down the flesh of humans with a titanium alloy and sacrificing soldiers' souls to possess its form, the fortified armor shells are one of the most dangerous things ever devised by human hands. Impervious to the elements and possessing an invincible arsenal of gadgets, the fortified armor shells were meant to be only used by a select few. those who would bring an end to the war and personally destroy the Allied powers. Shiro Hagakure cared not for the morality of his actions, valuing conquest and power above all else. As such, for the final fortified shell's creation, Shiro Hagakure believed the souls of simple soldiers were not enough fuel for a suit meant for a commander. They needed a different kind of soul. Something pure. Sacrificing the newborn son of one of their soldiers to the armor shell and murdering its mother in cold blood, the fortified armor shell known as Kasumi would forever be cursed. The shell itself, found haunted by the soul of the murdered mother, her rage consuming whoever wears it. If they could even manage to wear Kasumi, that is. The armored shells nearly kill whoever puts them on, the survivors experiencing intense pain with each step of the armor bonding process. Before these armored shells and even proficient users of the zero-form defense were deployed onto the battlefield, the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki drove Imperial Japan to surrender in the face of total annihilation.
Because of course it was the bombs. Japan totally wasn't on the verge of losing before this. Anyways.
Hagakure would be indicted for his crimes against humanity, and his unnamed son,
we have no idea what his son's name is in the manga, so just roll with it,
would attempt to right his wrongs. Using the zero-form defense and all of Shiro Hagakure's wartime inventions to defend those without fangs, the Hagakure family would secretly safeguard the world from all who would do it harm. The current generation, the only remaining members of the Hagakure bloodline in the midst of a high-magnitude earthquake that literally shattered Japan, are two brothers trained by their stern patriarch and martial arts master, Oboro Hagakure. The older brother, Hirari, would often challenge his father's concept of justice and their cause, valuing their individuality versus the conformity of their father's mission. The younger brother, Kakugo, would grow to become the more dedicated of the two to his father's goal, to becoming a hero for the downtrodden and defenseless, ones without fangs. Oboro, after subjecting his sons to training far worse than the Imperial militaries, would bequeath 2 fortified armor shells to the boys, seemingly without knowledge of the armor's possession by a ghost with a literal bullet through their head. Oboro would bestow his ambitious firstborn, the cursed shell known as Kasumi. Believing they were worthy of the armor's power, but unsure of their survival, Oboro stuck his boys in separate chambers with no food, water, or natural light to speak of, with their respective shells. If they were unable to even wear the armor at all, they would surely perish.
Meanwhile, in the wasteland, a young girl named Horie is bullied by an overweight asshole in her class. Horie retaliates much to the chagrin of her childhood friend Haoka, stopping the bully, but landing the two in hot water. Horie herself loves to sing, bringing those who listen to her songs joy and courage in a time where both are in little supply. That is everything you really need to know about Horie. Back to the boys.
While Hirari was given Kasumi to wield, Kakugo was given an armor fueled by the souls of 300 noble Japanese Imperial soldiers. One looking for a warrior strong of body, but pure of heart. This armor, that also had to be warmed by a young boy's body heat, would grant Kakugo the opportunity to wear them. Meanwhile, deemed incompatible and subsequently gored by Kasumi's fleshy interior, Hirari's dream of a peaceful world was seemingly at an end. Kasumi was unable to be tamed, unable to find someone as righteous in her fury as she was. That is until, well,
Hirari's severed head sees the ghost of Kasumi and recognizes he's not what she's looking for in a guy. He's like 14, by the way. He uses the zero-form iron balls in his severed limbs to fuse himself into a liquid metal form, reshaping themselves into a feminine robo-body worthy enough for Kasumi's love. Kasumi, recognizing how batshit insane this teenage boy was, gladly accepts their offer and fuses willingly with Hirari. And by the time that Oboro realizes, my son has great tits, Hirari has essentially declared he will eliminate all human life for the sake of a higher justice. Hirari, by this point, I will refer to by he, him, and they, them pronouns. They don't go by she, her, surprisingly, even though they present as femme and gladly dress this way beyond just Kasumi's influence. And yes, before you say anything, it is a case of a queer-coded character automatically being the villain, and that is unacceptable! However, Harara and Kasumi's general relationship is a fuck it we ball kind of situation. Very Sigma. They will gladly do whatever they can to get shit done. And that's acknowledged as both a strength and a character flaw in story. Harara does have some depth, but it's locked behind this veneer of fetishization both in and out of the context of its story and not explained to the best of its ability. Anyways, Harara and his father Oboro duel to the death. Kakugo tries to get in the middle of it, partially costing his father his life. Kakugo tries to attack Harara in retaliation, but gets bodied off a cliff in the middle of the Arctic. Harara, believing they've won, doesn't double-check the bottom of the chasm for his brother's corpse, and starts their journey towards total human annihilation. Harara would amass an army of not only tactical fiends and the strongest humans in the wasteland, but also a giant castle in the middle of said wasteland. A castle whose true form is a giant robot that looks like the Buddha. Because of course. Kakugo survives the fall somehow, vowing to stop his brother and to ultimately save all of humanity from their wicked, fabulous wrath. And so, during Horie and Haoka's second year at Gyakujuji High School, their lives would change forever with the arrival of a teenage Kakugo Hagakure. This is where our story begins properly, and if you think the lore was crazy enough, you haven't seen the execution. Fire! You know those doodles carved on your desk in high school, or that awkward kid who would draw really fucked up shit in his journal near the back of class? Imagine if that kid made a shonen manga with really good fight choreography. That's Apocalypse Zero in a nutshell. Art that is surprisingly well detailed and incredibly energetic, mixed with a deviancy and darkness similar to the filmography of Clive Barker, Cenobites and all. Despite how grotesque and sometimes over the top the designs can be, as well as the treatment of serious subject matter, Apocalypse Zero remains a light-hearted experience despite the terrifying situations his protagonist finds himself in. Kakugo is a very straightforward, incredibly reserved, but kind-hearted young man whose dedication to justice takes precedent above all other things. At least before he finally makes friends and meets the future love of his life. Kakugo's friends from Gyakujuji High School, Ponta and Pionsuke, are fairly innocent and one-note boys, while Hooka comes off at first as a seriously possessive jerk before being retconned into Horie's childhood friend. The school itself, a refuge for those who need it in the wasteland, is run by the goblin-faced Mr. Zenigata and the perverted unnamed principal who harbors bad thoughts about Horie. However, it's the only game in town, and by that I mean there's literally nowhere else to go. And as for Horie, well, there's not really much to her. She's really nice, she's a good singer, I guess. She's the apple of everyone's eye, and exclusively in the manga, a bit chubby. That's it in regards to her character. More on that later. This early portion of the story is somewhat reminiscent to Full Metal Panic, if you catch my drift. A soldier, or really serious fish out of water, is plopped into a high school setting that immediately contrasts with them. Except that Kakugo isn't used to civilian life and isn't really planning on being a civilian for long, so he's just upfront when people ask him about anything. And these early chapters are also the worst in terms of Apocalypse Zero's offensive content. The tactical fiends are so cartoonishly evil and hard to look at sometimes, but they're drawn with real effort and consistency to stay on model. Same goes for Harara's original origin. Whatever. Harara sends fiend after fiend at Kakugo in the school until Kakugo is essentially forced to tackle Harara head-on. Not just for the fate of mankind, but also the close friends he's made at Gyakujuji. His only friends. This is where the series changes gears to a Fist of the North Star kung fu revenge fantasy where Kakugo must fight each of Harara's evil generals as Harara himself heals from a failed gamble at possessing a tactical fiend. The action from here on out, as well as the depths of the villains, grow. They aren't the most complex characters, but they're at least developed somewhat before they eventually die a horrific death. They're characterized and given a decent dynamic between them and Harara that is elevated by the variety of character designs for both their humanoid forms as well as transformed battle forms. Even if those forms and character quirks are incredibly not safe for work, Kakugo's fights with Rai and Bolt and Shidokuro are all fairly memorable. Each fight challenging Kakugo in interesting and unexpected ways, pushing him to his absolute limit in and out of Zero. Especially when Shidokuro and later on more of Harara's forces use Kakugo's love of Horie against him. It's a series where fights to the death are the only answer to the world's problems, and it seems to revel in that aspect. providing bombastic but sometimes fairly drawn-out fights for the sake of showing another cool 2-page spread or another sick move Kakugo can use. You get the idea. Rule of cool wins out in Apocalypse Zero, and it's to its own benefit. However, this series isn't the most layered when it comes to character development. While everyone is very much a different person by the end of the series, both figuratively and literally in the case of the reincarnating Hagakure brothers and their mystic magic great-grand Hitler, the most profound transformation Kakugo goes through is simply falling in love and saving the world. Arara basically learns nothing after fighting his brother to the death and somehow being brought back to life out of thin air. They just go, okay, sure, why not? Let's just heal Earth or whatever. I don't fucking care anymore. Please leave. And like, the day before this, he was ready to R-word his brother to mind control him? Again, character development doesn't really track sometimes beyond surface level concepts. And as for Horie, her arc is just helping out, falling in love with our lead, getting herself possessed and turned into a bug monster, cutting her hair. In the end, she basically reaffirms her feelings for Kakugo and the two live happily ever after. That's it. There's no grand message in this manga beyond what I've previously stated. Valuing humanity, being brave in the face of danger, standing up for your friends when they're in need. Very shonen manga philosophies that don't aim to be anything more than just that. Nothing profound, just giving the reader a clear hero to root for, someone you can look up to and get excited for when they find a way to win, be charmed by the occasional joke or character quirk. And people seem to take to that according to translations of letter columns from Tankobons, the series being fairly popular in its original 2-year run. While not nearly as revolutionary as the hits of the time, Apocalypse Zero's developed this cult status where its craftsmanship is applauded by the select few who enjoyed it. It's a turn your brain off kind of series as much as I hate using that phrase, something that is far more interested in giving you a spectacle that stuns the senses, but if you try questioning the logic of things, it pokes a hole the size of Mount Rushmore through the thing. So it's best to ignore it until Yamaguchi decides to retcon something again in the story. If you want an easy shonen that wears its love of the genre and its conventions on its sleeves, while still attempting to experiment and do its own thing, read Apocalypse Zero. However, if you're not convinced on the quality of the series, there is an alternative. After the success of Shigurui in the mainstream, Yamaguchi would return to the world of Apocalypse Zero and rework the core aspects of its story into something more mature. Enter Exo Skull Zero, a reimagining of Apocalypse Zero that turns it into something more like Casshern Sins or Wolf's Rain. Kakugo is still the main character, he still uses a special combat suit named Zero, with a myriad of gadgets, but it takes itself more seriously as well as its setting. That aspect of social isolation and dedication to one's cause is stressed heavily with this version of Kakugo. A warrior of justice who's awoken long after he was last needed. The rest of the Exo Skull warriors who've mastered Zero Form defense seemingly missing from their chamber. So it's up to Kakugo to discover why they were awoken in this mysterious wasteland in the first place and to find the other Exo Skulls, whether they be friend or foe. While Apocalypse Zero has been fully translated and scanned online for all to enjoy, Exo Skull Zero only has a select few chapters for English-speaking audiences, which is a damn shame because it's a clear step up from Apocalypse Zero from its art alone. Reading these two stories back to back, you can see Yamaguchi developing and maturing as an artist, his themes and character writing truly shining the older he gets. And again, that's not to say Apocalypse Zero is really bad, quite the contrary, it's really damn good. It's just trashy and zany and unafraid of being that way. It's a manga for people who love manga, especially those of the shonen battle variety. If you're still watching and haven't read any of Apocalypse Zero or its sequel series Exo Skull Zero, please go ahead and read it. There's no confusing reading order or endless side content. It's a concise and very satisfying package that understands its reader base and provides what they want. And to me, that's all I want sometimes. Something to escape into, be wowed and shocked and overall gutted, and make me feel like I read something someone wanted to make. A work of passion, a manga that isn't just a product for the sake of royalties and anime adaptations, rather a piece of art whose intentions are clear on the page, even if the execution is a little trashy. Thank you for watching.